As promised, this is a Microsoft-only podcast, so we're going to be talking about MSFT.
Yep.
The big misfit.
The misfit. In June 2000, they had a really big month. And this might,
Not a good month.
Yeah, it might not be the best month to start our Microsoft pivot on, but an important month in the history of the company nonetheless. So in June 2000, Microsoft has been ordered by the U.S. court system to be sort of cleaved in two.
And they have been charged with the crime of monopolization.
Yeah. So Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson essentially split them into two corporations. They're going to separate the operating system business from the applications business so that the company, the corporation that makes Windows and the corporation that makes Office and Internet Explorer and all of those things are two distinct entities. To what ends that will serve? Probably not many.
It doesn't actually end up happening. Can you imagine if it did, though?
I mean, what the effect would be what? Like
if
the Microsoft applications divisions builds applications for Microsoft?
Well, I would assume the operating system would also count as software.
But it says the operating system business and the applications business.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's just Word, basically. Office, right?
Yeah. I mean, the ultimate effect would have been that the applications they create, they wouldn't be able to work with the operating system division at the same point, right? At the same time.
Right.
It's an attempt to eliminate the possibility that they could sort of secretly ship their browser with their operating system, causing upheaval. And, who knows?
Microsoft, of course, refused to accept any wrongdoing here. They constantly said that, we're innovators. We're not a monopoly, blah, 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 blue. But of course, not everyone agreed with this, not just the court system.
Right. Yeah. Former Apple VP Jean-Louis Gasset.
The gas man.
Mr. BOS himself.
Jean-Louis.
Yeah.
He always has to get his opinion in, doesn't he?
He doesn't like anybody. So Gasset says, I'd be the last one to say that Microsoft makes shitty software. But they have not made one significant innovation. Not one. So apparently Microsoft, good at software, not good at innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think maybe remains to be seen, considering the most successful software company in the world.
Who knows? Maybe the Zune comes back.
Yeah, Zune. What would they call it?
Zune 2?
Yeah, probably.
With
probably
TOO.
that. Yeah, also. Zune also. Yeah, love that. Let's do that.
Interesting.
Microsoft.
We'll see.
Yeah. Hit us up. Bill Gates had some words to say. He likened the antitrust lawsuit to Apple's look and feel lawsuit, the lawsuit that Apple brought against Microsoft for stealing the look and feel of their operating system for Windows 95.
Even though they had licensed it to Microsoft.
Yeah.
So I still don't understand that.
I don't know.
The thinking there. Did they just think that they wouldn't notice?
They were going through all sorts of CEOs back then. They don't know what they were doing.
Well, that's true.
95, Jobs wasn't there anymore. Who was that? Emilio?
Newton. Killing it with a newt. Yeah, crazy times, man.
Crazy times. Newton making its triumphant return to the iPad OS in 2020.
Yeah, that's right. In their own time. Scribble.
Scribs.
I can't wait to scribble.
Can't wait to do one.
Bill Gates, I think to this day, refuses to admit they did anything wrong.
And I mean, I will say, regardless of whether or not Microsoft did something wrong, the court system clearly says, yes, you did something wrong. Apple in 2020 is not in too dissimilar a position to where Microsoft was in 1999, 2000.
Not really, right?
Yeah.
Other than that they don't have, well, okay. For computers, they're pretty much in the same position they were back then in terms of market dominance. But in terms of smartphones, I guess you could make the same argument.
I think it is less about sure, right? I think the antitrust argument is that if you install Internet Explorer on Windows by default and that's the option they get, most people aren't going to make a choice to do something different.
Yes, if you take Apple's platforms on their own, obviously Apple is doing anti-competitive all the time.
Right. You get Safari, and that's the browser you get. That's your default browser, and you don't get a choice until the fall this year because we got some antitrust shit happening. We got to do something. We got to do the very minimum amount possible to try and stave that off.
Right. And we hate it so much we're not even going to mention it by word in the keynote.
Yeah, exactly.
Just on the slide. So weird.
I know, it is weird.
I don't know why they wouldn't just get the brownie points for that.
Yeah, especially since it sort of brings their operating systems more into parity with one another.
Like, I think one of the few things that like normies, one of the few ways in which they like customize how they use computers is they say like, oh, I want to use Firefox. I've heard Chrome is good, you know?
Right.
Or maybe not so much with mail apps, but like, you know, choosing that sort of default app for a very common task is like one of the ways people customize, not just power users, I think.
Right.
And it's such a like win for a user experience. It's baffling to me that they wouldn't call that out.
Right. And what if you've been using Firefox for 20 years and all your bookmarks are in Firefox, and the only way you can get links from other apps to open in Firefox is if they support the option to do that. Like that really sucks because that's how it is now.
I'm super excited about the email. Being able to change the default email app because I use a different email app and it sucks when I occasionally open a Mail To link and it just opens the stupid mail app.
Yeah. And I think I have tried multiple email apps in the last 10 years of using an iPhone, and they never stick because I can't get them to work the way I expect them to work. And I've tried it with browsers too, and now I'm excited. I mean, I like Safari, I
use it on iOS.
Yeah. I'm Stockholmed. But maybe that will change now that I have the ability.
Well, you know what? Actually, I'm going to say, I think Safari is a good example of what they should have been doing this entire time, which is saying like, listen, you can use whatever app you want, but here's a case for why you should use ours.
Yeah.
And with Safari, it's all about privacy.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying like, we are going to put privacy restrictions, tools, and utilities in our app that no one else is willing to do.
Right.
Like, let alone Google.
Apple fights for the user.
Exactly. I imagined a grid.
The grid.
But it's just to say, like, this is what people are saying. And I think this is a good example of it, how it could work, is that it's up to Apple in this case to prove that their app should be used. They shouldn't force us to. They should be making the best apps.
Right. Because you're not going to...
if they're not, then they should let third parties fill those spaces.
Right. And you're not going to switch away from a default that's great.
And to disallow that in the absence of the greatest apps possible is hubris.
Sure. I agree with that. And I think that's why they're getting into trouble now, is because...
Hubris.
All right, so let's move on from antitrust litigation and talk about Microsoft's big win for the month.
The big get.
The big get. Who did Microsoft get in June 2000?
Who did they screw over? Well, Apple.
I mean, there's a reason we're pivoting to Microsoft-only news from here on out. So Microsoft, much to everybody's surprise, just straight up bought Bungie. Bought them.
And was the Xbox a thing at this point?
I believe so. I don't know that it was out yet because I think Halo was a launch title, right?
Okay, so it wasn't a complete surprise that they were doing something game-related.
The Xbox, Microsoft Xbox, was officially unveiled in January of 2001. But I think
this announcement would have been quite strange, I imagine.
Yeah, I think this is sort of maybe what tipped people's hands into realizing that Microsoft was getting into the gaming space. Also, 2001 is when the Dreamcast was killed off. Yes, Josh, I brought it there.
But okay.
No, you want to know? It's not irrelevant.
Oh, tell me.
I believe the guy that was running Sega at the time ended up at Microsoft. Sega and Microsoft were working together.
He burned the office down.
He burned the office down. Also, take a look at the Dreamcast controller and then take a look at the original Xbox controller.
It's a chunky boy.
Yeah. They bear a striking similarity. The button layout on the Xbox and the button layout on the Dreamcast, pretty similar.
He stole the molds as he left the office.
Yeah, the Microsoft software was inside of the Dreamcast. Microsoft and Sega were working together, and there was some synergy, like Shenmue 2. Dude, you got me on. God damn it! Cue the music. The only U.S. release of Shenmue 2 up until last year was released on the original Xbox. I got more to say, but I'm not going to say it. So you're going to make fun of me.
All right, stop the music.
So I think at the time, Apple fans were super bummed about Bungie.
Yeah, they were such a staple and a sort of a point of pride, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it was like Apple's id Software, the Apple equivalent of id Software. Mm-hmm. They had made a couple of really high profile for the Mac first person shooters, Marathon 3, right? They made 3 of them.
And one really good third person beat 'em up.
Yeah, anime style action,
really high quality, underrated game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, called Oni. And that would be the last Mac game that Bungie releases until Aspire brings Halo to the Mac later on. And that happens in 2003, 2004, I think.
I bet it's super stable and has a high frame rate.
I ran it on my G5 pretty well.
You know, now I'm remembering callback to an earlier episode. Was it WWDC last year where Bungie was on stage?
I think that's right. They did Apple showed off a Bungie trailer for Halo, and at that point Halo was a third-person action game, and I think it sort of focused a lot more on the vehicular combat. Is that right? Do you remember that?
I've played a lot of Halo recently, and it's not a good idea to do that.
Yeah, I remember the vehicles being total shit.
They're a lot of fun, but they put a big old target on you.
Yeah. We're here to talk about Bungie's final Mac game.
That's right. We played it so that you don't have to. By played it, I mean the first 3 levels.
Hey, everybody. We've been having some fun, saying we pivoted to Microsoft. We're a Microsoft podcast now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Full in, full on.
All in. We lied to you, and we're not sorry about it.
Oh, yeah, it's true. We did lie.
Still an Apple podcast. Remember those? We got to get some mileage out of those iBooks I bought a few months ago.
Yeah, and I got all these MacMan t-shirts that they can't ship now. They're stuck across the pond, So we gotta make our money back here. I'm not sure why we decided to pivot.
Yeah, it was a mistake. So we have these old iBooks and we put Oni on them after Josh finally upgraded his RAM.
It took a while.
Well, you got to quarantine everything now.
Yeah, that's right.
So surprisingly, these old iBook G3s run Oni pretty well.
Pretty well. I'm running it in 640 resolution. What are you running at?
1024.
Pretty smooth.
So Oni is a third-person action beat-em-up and also kind of a platformer.
Oof.
In an anime style, anime-ish.
Yes, when we say anime, think back to your high school sketchbook and your anime OCs.
Yeah.
That's sort of what it looks like.
Yeah. It's like an American-style anime.
But very, very influenced by like Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, I would say like the plot, the visuals, the
lingo,
the attitude.
the dude.
In this game, you play a cyborg
Question mark?
Yeah. Or synthetic human named Kanoko, and she's good at punching.
Yeah, so we should just come out and say, like, we were hoping to come to you having played the full game, and we were hoping to have sort of a fuller conversation about this, but we just hated it so much.
Well, I think we also sort of knew in the back of our minds that this wasn't going to be a great game.
No, there was some foreshadowing when we talked about it in previous episodes where the ratings had not been great, and the people who liked it were mostly Mac people.
Yeah.
And I think they were just happy to have anything.
Yeah. And ultimately, like, the ratings weren't terrible, but I think even for a game in the year 2000, this game was not good.
No, and it struggled during development. There was a lot of false starts. I think the final product is something that was very thrown together.
Yeah, because
and I'm not just being critical. I think that's actually what happened.
Yeah, because the publishing rights went to a third-party company, and Microsoft allowed development of Oni to be finished.
Right.
But I don't think it was like the Oni team was separated from the larger Bungie team to finish the game. So I don't think it didn't have the resources of the entire company behind it. And I think it was rushed to finish because Microsoft wanted Halo so bad.
Right. And it's too bad because I think there's something sort of, there's the snowflake of a good game in there.
I think you're right.
Like so to talk more about the combat, it's sort of it's a beat 'em up. It's a like combos based action game where you have your sort of like punches and kicks, but there's also like more powerful punches and kicks. But there's this very interesting component, which is blocking. And I don't really know that I've seen this elsewhere, but the way you block is that you don't do anything.
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty hard to do because you are, your first idea when you get into a battle with an enemy is always to just keep pressing the buttons to punch them more. Mm-hmm. But the game is well designed in that you shouldn't do that. You should get in a few jabs and then block and then get in a few more jabs. And it's really as easy as that. But it's actually quite interesting because enemies have sort of different attack patterns. They might try to move around you. Sometimes they do more powerful attacks. So you can't always rely on the same thing. You kind of have to be reacting and planning. And there is a little bit of tactics to it. So it ends up being kind of interesting.
But I think at the same time that interesting piece is there, the enemies do not telegraph the kinds of moves that they're going to do.
No.
And everything on screen happens so quickly. There's so little reaction
what do you mean,
time.
Man? They're always yelling, "Don't make me hurt you."
Yeah, in at odd times.
Hey, don't make me hurt you.
Yeah, it just like I think they wanted the game to be fast paced and frenetic, but they put this system in place that sort of requires you to sort of hang back. And those two things are sort of at like odds and not in a, like the tension it creates isn't a great one. I think combined also, I think with the Mac version, the camera being controlled with the mouse and your kick and punch buttons are also controlled with the left and right mouse buttons. Like
the mouse is way too reactive.
Yeah, it's way too sensitive. And I found myself just like whipping the camera around like an 8-year-old trying to play the original Super Mario Brothers, just moving the controller. And while I'm no like professional video game player, I do consider myself pretty good at it. I can understand a system and understand how a game is played reasonably quickly and start to figure it out. And to Oni's credit, I did start to figure this out, but I never got comfortable enough to a point where I felt proficient. I always felt like I was fighting the camera.
Yeah.
And I think partly because there is never a point in where your ability to stop doing anything with the camera is possible. I
think I've touched on this in an earlier episode, but I have trouble with old games. Not
so does your mom.
God damn it. Not because of graphics, but because of user experience.
Sure.
Graphics are constantly improving, and there's a clear way in which they become higher fidelity year over year. as hardware improves and software practices improve. But user experience is not a straight line. And every game sort of has to reinvent the wheel when they create their own UI and their own control schemes. And, some things are shared, some buttons always mean the same thing on a console. If you're playing a shooter, the mouse is going to control the reticle, so on and so forth. But in the details, user experience is this much more ambiguous field when it comes to games. And the history of game development has been in part a story of refining user experience. So when I say I have problems with old games, it's usually because they just haven't figured some of this stuff out yet.
Right.
Or they haven't put the time into it. Or they don't have processing power to make it a good experience.
Right. I think to your point, the kernels of the Oni that we were promised are in this game. You can see where it could be a great game. But I think and I think you can sort of see the lineage of Marathon to Halo, right? Halo is a very good game. It's a fun game, and it's
awesome.
Great loops, and the story is engaging, and the time was taken to, they had a lot of time and a lot of resources to make Halo what it was. And you can tell that they did not have that with Oni. And I remember looking forward to this game because I thought it looked really good. And, I was not as familiar with Marathon, but in gaming on the Mac was new to me. So this seemed like a really good sort of proposition. And it was really disappointing when I played the demo initially, and I never pursued it after that. And in this instance, where we had intended to sort of play through the game, there are 14 levels, and each level takes at least a half an hour if you pass it on the first try. And for all of the sort of benefits that the game touts, every single benefit this dynamic and unique combat system, well, it sort of falls on its face because it essentially devolves into you whipping the camera around and just punching and kicking anything you can get your hands on. If you've got a gun, good luck, because you're only going to have ammo for 2 shots and you're going to have to throw it away.
Very hard to control.
Yeah. And then traversal, essentially what the game boils down to is you go into a building, you go up a flight of stairs, you type some shit to a console, you go back down that flight of stairs, and you move on to the next thing. And they have this strange sort of, I played the first 3 levels through, and they have this strange loop on every single level where you go in one side, you do a thing, and then you kind of come out the other side and end up almost exactly where you started. I don't necessarily know that it's carried through the entire game, but they know they hired an architect to design the levels, and I kind of feel like that was maybe the architectural interest of Oni is not a high watermark of it. The level design tends to be pretty bland and flat.
Ultimately, this is the true failing of the game, which is it's boring.
Yeah.
I think we could have forgiven clunky controls if the story was interesting, or even if the story wasn't interesting, if the level design itself was engaging. I think that's more important, honestly.
Yeah.
I think we would have stuck with it, but it's just, and it would have been, maybe a more well-regarded game, but it just is kind of boring.
Yeah. And I think, everybody wants a 40-hour game, and to Oni's credit, it's a 7 to 10 hour game. But if this game was a 2 to 3 hour game, and I could
fun indie romp.
I mean, it feels padded. I run down a hall, and then a dude pops out, and I punch him, and then a dude suddenly appears behind me, and I punch him, and then I run down another hall, and it's just that on repeat over and over again, and all I'm looking at is different boxes. You can see the constraints that were placed upon the developers, and it's such a bummer.
Listen, if you love Oni, if you finish the game and you think we're, big weenies for not having stuck it out, you're really missing how good it gets at level 5 or whatever, write to us and let us know. We'll give it another shot.
I watched a playthrough, and it does not get better at level 5. There is an interesting dream sequence where they do a gigantic plot dump that was kind of weird. Yeah, she's dreaming in what appears to be a corporate building, and she confronts all of the enemies in the game. in her dream, and then she wakes up, and then the enemies come out and start fighting her.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And you run down some halls.
And you unlock some doors.
Yeah.
Cool. Stupid game.
That's our review for Oni.
You might be wondering why there's another episode of Memory Protection so quickly after the last one. And there's no reason. Partly is because we did cut out a bunch of content that we were going to use because of Dub and just made more sense to talk about other stuff. But we also wanted to take this opportunity to talk about something cool that's going to be happening soon.
Next month, we've got a special guest coming on the show to talk to us about Macworld 2000. We hope you'll join us. We can't wait to do it.
We hope you join us for this very special episode of Memory Protection, where someone will die.
Dude, that's not what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's how you get replaced. Remember?
Josh, I'm not ready. Wait, hold up. I'm still alive 5 years from now.
Oh, shit. Paradox.